Rancher found her sleeping in the dirt, lifted her up, said, "You'll never sleep cold again." John had been working on the ranch all day, the sun beating down relentlessly on his back as he tended to his cattle. His worn boots sank into the dry earth with each step he took, the dust swirling in the air as he walked. The ranch was a quiet place, nestled far from the bustling town, surrounded by rolling hills and open plains. It wasn't much, but it was his. For as long as he could remember, this land had been home. It had seen him through some of the hardest days of his life, and it had stood strong through all of them. John was a man of few words, preferring the company of his animals and the land to the noise of towns and people. But the ranch had its way of making him feel whole, especially after losing his wife years ago. That evening, as the sky began to change colors and the heat of the day finally began to fade, John saddled his horse, ready to make the ride into town. There were supplies to pick up, things he couldn't grow or make himself. As the horse moved swiftly across the open plains, John's mind wandered back to the years before. His wife Abigail had been his world. They had built the ranch together, their dreams tied to the land. But those dreams had been shattered by illness that took her away far too soon. Since then, it had been just him and the quiet. But that didn't bother him. He had learned to live alone, his solitude broken only by the occasional trip to town or visits from the local ranchers. As he neared the outskirts of town, the sun now dipping below the horizon, he noticed something strange in the distance. At first he thought it was just a trick of the fading light, but as he got closer, he saw her, a woman, lying on the ground by the side of the road. His heart skipped a beat. He pulled his horse to a stop, his boots scraping against the dirt as he dismounted. The woman was curled up, as if trying to escape the cold, her thin, tattered clothes offering little protection. Her hair was matted and dirty, and her face was streaked with dust and grime. She was pale, and there was something about the way she lay there that made John's stomach tighten. Without thinking, he kneeled beside her. She was breathing, but barely. Her eyes were closed, and her body seemed to be too weak to respond. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should he leave her there and ride into town to get help? Or should he try to help her himself? Something inside him pushed him to act. This wasn't just any woman. This was someone who needed help, someone who was alone and vulnerable. He couldn't just leave her to die out here, not with the night closing in and the cold creeping over the land. With a grunt, he gently lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. Her body was so light, so fragile, and he could feel the weight of her exhaustion in every breath she took. John didn't know who she was or what had brought her here, but he wasn't about to let her suffer alone. He carefully placed her on the back of his horse and mounted behind her. As they rode back to the ranch, John could feel the woman's body trembling against his, the only sound being the soft clip-clop of the horse's hooves on the dirt road. The moon was just beginning to rise, casting a soft silver light over the land, but the journey felt longer than usual. The weight of the unknown pressed down on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this woman had been through something terrible. The ranch was quiet when they arrived. It was always quiet, save for the rustling of the wind and the occasional call of a bird. John led the horse to the barn and carefully dismounted. He gently lifted the woman from the horse and carried her inside. The warmth of the cabin hit him as soon as he entered, the fire crackling in the hearth. He placed her on the couch by the fire, her body still limp in his arms. The flames flickered, casting a soft glow across the room, and John hurried to grab some blankets to cover her. He noticed the shivers that racked her body, and his heart went out to her. She was so cold, too cold for someone who had been out in the open for so long. For a moment John stood there, unsure of what to do next. He wasn't a doctor, and he didn't have the skills to treat someone in her condition. But he couldn't just leave her like this. He hurried to his small kitchen and grabbed a pot of water, heating it over the stove. The warmth of the cabin slowly began to work its magic as he returned to her side, sitting down beside the couch. Her eyes fluttered open, just for a moment, and she looked up at him, confusion clouding her gaze. "Are you?" Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. John gave her a reassuring smile though he wasn't sure she could see it clearly. "I'm John," he said, his voice low and steady. "I found you out on the road." You were in bad shape." She blinked, as if trying to process his words. "Why? Why are you helping me?" John felt a knot in his chest tighten, but he said nothing for a moment. He wasn't sure how to explain why he had stopped, why he couldn't leave her there to die alone. It wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was more than that. There was something about her that felt familiar, something in her eyes that reminded him of the lost, fragile hope he had seen in others before. He wasn't sure what it was, but something inside him told him to help. "You needed help," he said simply. "I couldn't leave you out there." She closed her eyes, her body still trembling, but her breath steadier now. John placed a hand on her forehead, his touch gentle. She wasn't running a fever, but she had clearly been through too much. Her skin was rough from being out in the elements, and she had the hollow look of someone who had gone without food for too long. For a long while, John just sat there, watching over her as she slept, her body slowly relaxing into the warmth of the cabin. It was strange, this feeling of responsibility, of wanting to protect someone who was, at least in his mind, a stranger. But as the hours passed, he realized that he couldn't just turn her away. He couldn't leave her to fend for herself again, not after what he had seen. The loneliness of the ranch had always been something he had learned to live with, but now, with her here, there was a chance for something different, a chance for companionship, even if it was temporary. He leaned back in his chair, watching the fire dance in the hearth, the soft glow of the flames casting long shadows across the room. John wasn't sure what would happen next. Would she be able to recover? Would she want to stay here, or would she leave when she had the strength? All he knew was that, for now, she was safe, and that was enough. The days passed slowly, and with each one Sarah grew a little stronger. At first, she had been too weak to even sit up, but with John's careful attention, she was beginning to show signs of recovery. He had kept her by the fire for the first few days, feeding her soup and warm tea, letting her rest and regain some of her strength. John wasn't sure what kind of life she had led before, but from the way she looked when he found her, it was clear she had been through something terrible. But now, in the warmth of the ranch, the coldness that had once gripped her seemed to melt away, bit by bit. One morning, Sarah woke up to find John already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The smell of freshly baked bread and sizzling bacon filled the air. She sat up slowly, the blankets falling away as she stretched, her body still sore from the journey. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and the room was filled with a peaceful stillness that made her feel as though she had been transported to another world. As she sat on the couch, she could hear John moving around the kitchen, the rhythmic sound of his footsteps familiar now. He had been kind to her since she arrived at the ranch, taking care of her without ever asking for anything in return. There was no judgment in his eyes, no questions about her past, just a quiet, steadfast presence that made her feel safe. It was a strange feeling, one she hadn't known in a long time. "How are you feeling today?" John asked, his voice gentle but steady as he turned to look at her. His hands were busy working on the food, but his attention never wavered from her. Sarah blinked, surprised by the question. No one had asked her how she felt in such a long time. People had often seen her as a problem, someone who was broken and needed fixing. But John didn't treat her that way. He simply saw her as a person who needed care. "I'm better, I think," Sarah replied quietly, her voice still weak but stronger than before. She tested her limbs, flexing her fingers and stretching her legs. The stiffness had begun to ease, and for the first time in a while, she didn't feel like she was dragging a heavy weight behind her. John smiled as he set a plate of food down in front of her. "Good. You've made progress." Sarah looked at the food, her stomach rumbling as the scent of the meal filled her senses. It had been so long since she had eaten something this good. She picked up her fork, hesitating for a moment before taking her first bite. The warmth of the food spread through her, and for a fleeting moment she almost forgot about the hunger and pain she had felt in the past. As she ate, Sarah watched John from across the room. He was a man of few words, but there was a quiet strength about him that she admired. He wasn't like the men she had known before, men who had used her, abandoned her, or left her to fend for herself. John simply cared. He didn't ask for anything, didn't expect anything in return. He had saved her when no one else would have. "Thank you," she said after a long pause, her voice soft but sincere. It was the first time she had truly said it. She wasn't sure how to express the gratitude she felt for his kindness, but she knew that she was thankful. No one had ever helped her like this before. No one had ever given her a chance to heal. John glanced up from his work, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that softened. "You don't have to thank me," he replied, his voice as calm as ever. "It's just what's right." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to that. It was hard to believe that someone would do something for her simply because it was the right thing to do. She had spent so many years in the streets fighting for survival that kindness felt foreign to her. But here, in this place, with John, it felt different. It felt like she could finally breathe again. As the days passed, John continued to care for Sarah, never asking her to do more than she could manage. She slowly became more accustomed to the routines of the ranch. John showed her how to take care of the animals, how to fix the fences that lined the property, and how to tend to the small garden behind the house. The work wasn't easy, but it was grounding. It gave her something to focus on, something to look forward to. One morning, after Sarah had gathered the eggs from the chicken coop, John led her to the barn, where he had been working on fixing the roof. The task was a big one, and he needed help to finish it. Sarah was hesitant at first, unsure of what she could offer, but John handed her a hammer and a few nails, and showed her how to secure the boards in place. "Don't worry if it's not perfect," John said with a small grin. "We're just getting it done." Sarah nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she worked. But as she hammered the nails into place, she felt a sense of accomplishment, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't much, but it was progress. She was learning, growing stronger with each passing day. By the time the roof was fixed, Sarah felt more confident. She no longer felt like the broken woman who had been found lying on the side of the road. She was becoming someone new, someone capable of standing on her own. And it was all thanks to John, who had given her the chance to rebuild her life. That evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a deep orange, Sarah and John sat on the porch, watching the stars slowly appear in the sky. The air was cool, but the warmth of the fire inside the house could still be felt. "You know," Sarah began, her voice hesitant at first, "I never thought I'd be here, like this. I never thought I'd be able to get away from everything." John didn't answer right away, but his eyes softened as he looked out at the horizon. Sometimes you just need a place to heal, a place where you can breathe. Sarah looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent so many years running, so many years hiding from the pain, that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly be at peace. But here, with John, she felt like she was finally finding her way back to herself. "Thank you," she said again, her voice quiet but full of meaning. This time it wasn't just for the food or the shelter. It was for everything, for giving her a chance when no one else would. John nodded, his face serious but kind. You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're here." They sat there for a long while, the night settling around them. The ranch was still, peaceful, and Sarah felt for the first time in a long time that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The world might have been cruel to her, but here, with John, she had a chance to start over. And for the first time in years, she felt like she might actually be able to do it. The days on the ranch seemed to stretch out endlessly, each one bringing Sarah closer to herself, closer to a life she had never thought possible. The work was hard, but it was honest, and with each task, she found herself growing stronger. The warmth of the sun, the fresh air, and the quiet of the ranch were beginning to heal her in ways she never expected. Sarah had started to believe that maybe this was what she had been searching for all along, a place where she could finally be at peace. John continued to be a steady presence in her life. He never pushed her to do more than she could handle, never asked her about her past. It was as if he understood that healing was something that couldn't be rushed, something that had to be done at her own pace. He let her take small steps, and with each step, Sarah felt herself becoming more confident, more capable. One afternoon after finishing a long day of work in the garden, Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the air cool and crisp. She felt the weight of the day on her shoulders, but it wasn't a burden. It was the kind of tiredness that came from doing something meaningful, from working hard for something that mattered. John came out to join her, his boots crunching on the gravel as he made his way over to the porch. He sat down beside her, his quiet presence as familiar as the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. "You've been working hard," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're doing good work." Sarah smiled faintly, glancing at him. "I never thought I'd be able to do something like this," she admitted. "I never thought I could learn, or that I would be able to take care of anything." John nodded, his gaze focused on the horizon. "Everyone has their own time to learn. Some people start early, others start later, but it's never too late." Sarah looked down at her hands, the rough skin from the work she had been doing. Her nails were chipped, her fingers calloused, but they were strong now. She could see the changes in herself, even if they were small. She wasn't the woman who had been found on the side of the road anymore. She was someone different, someone who had learned to live again. "I feel like I'm starting over," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "You are," John said. "Everyone who's been through what you've been through has to start over. It's the only way to move forward." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah let the quiet wash over her, feeling the peace of the ranch settle into her bones. It was a strange feeling, being at peace. For so many years she had been running from one thing or another, never giving herself the chance to breathe, to rest. But here, on this ranch with John, she was learning to take each moment as it came, to let go of the past and focus on what was in front of her. One evening, after a long day of tending to the animals, Sarah found herself at the edge of the ranch, standing by the small creek that ran through the property. The sound of the water flowing over the rocks was soothing, the air cool and fresh. It was a perfect evening, one of those rare moments where everything seemed to fall into place. She knelt down by the water, her fingers brushing the surface, feeling the coolness of the stream against her skin. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to be still, to just exist in the moment, without worrying about what came next. There was no rush here, no need to be anywhere but where she was. It was a feeling she had never known before, a feeling of contentment, of peace with herself. As Sarah sat by the creek, she thought about her past, the life she had left behind, the people who had hurt her, the choices she had made that led her to this point. She couldn't change the past, but she had learned something important here. The past didn't define her. It was a part of her story, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. She had the power to write the next chapters, to decide who she would become. Sarah stood up, brushing the dirt off her hands. She turned and started back toward the house, the weight of her past feeling a little lighter. She knew that she still had a long way to go, but for the first time she felt like she was walking in the right direction. As she walked toward the house, John was waiting for her on the porch, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the cabin. The stars were out, sparkling in the clear night sky, and the world felt vast and full of possibility. "Did you have a good evening?" John asked as she approached.
"I did," Sarah replied, smiling. "It was quiet."
"Peaceful." John nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes that's all we need. For a while they both stood there in silence, looking out at the stars. The night was calm, and the only sounds were the soft rustling of the leaves in the trees and the distant calls of the night birds. It was a peaceful moment, one that Sarah would treasure for a long time. It was moments like this that reminded her how far she had come. The following weeks were filled with more work and more healing. Sarah continued to learn the ways of the ranch, becoming more confident with each task she took on. She helped John with the animals, fixed broken tools, and worked the land, learning things she never thought she could. John never pushed her too hard, always encouraging her to take her time and do things at her own pace. As the weather warmed, Sarah started to feel more at home on the ranch. It was no longer just a place where she had found refuge. It was a place where she was starting to build a life. She had begun to see herself as someone who could contribute, someone who had something valuable to offer. The quiet strength that John had shown her was beginning to take root in her own heart. One evening, as the sun began to set, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of the ranch, looking out at the land that stretched out before her. The sky was a beautiful shade of pink and orange, the air cool and fresh. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. John came up beside her, standing quietly next to her as they both looked out at the horizon. There was no need for words. The stillness between them spoke volumes. Sarah had found her place here, with John, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. "For everything." John glanced at her, his expression as calm as always, but there was something in his eyes that told her he understood. "You don't have to thank me," he said gently. "You're part of this now. And that's all that matters." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun setting on the horizon. She was part of something now, part of this land, part of this life. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. It had been a few weeks since Sarah had felt like she truly belonged at the ranch. The days were full of work, learning, and healing, and she found comfort in the routine. The once feared isolation had begun to feel like a sanctuary. The ranch was a place of new beginnings. Every morning as the sun began to rise, Sarah would start her day with John, caring for the animals and tending to the land. The simple life was working wonders for her, and the weight that had once crushed her heart was slowly lifting. But despite everything, the past was never far away. It lingered in the back of her mind, like a shadow that refused to be forgotten. Sarah knew it would eventually catch up to her. One evening, as the wind blew through the trees, Sarah heard a sound that made her heart skip. The sound of a horse approaching. She stood at the edge of the ranch, looking out over the open plains, the familiar sight of the land she had come to love stretching before her. But the figure on horseback was not familiar. A man rode slowly toward the ranch, his silhouette dark against the setting sun. It wasn't long before Sarah recognized him. It was Tom, the man from her past, the one who had once been a part of her life, the one she had tried to forget. Her stomach twisted in knots as she watched him approach. He wasn't the man she remembered, but she knew the look in his eyes. It was the same look he had worn when he had walked away from her, leaving her with nothing. Now, it seemed, he had come back. Sarah's heart raced. She wanted to run, to hide, but she stayed where she was. The past was here, and she couldn't avoid it any longer. Tom dismounted from his horse, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached the porch. His face was weathered, older than she remembered, but his presence still sent a shiver down her spine. "Sarah," he said her name as if it were a question, his voice rough from the long ride. She stood still, trying to control the flood of emotions rushing through her. "What do you want, Tom?" she asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Tom's eyes softened as he stepped closer. "I heard you were alive," he said, his voice tinged with something Sarah couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or guilt. "I had to come see for myself." "Why?" Sarah didn't understand. "Why now? After everything?" Tom looked away for a moment as if searching for the right words. "I made a mistake, Sarah. A big one," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I shouldn't have left you the way I did. I should have been there for you." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. The years of pain, of feeling abandoned, rushed back in an instant. "You left me," she said, her voice trembling. "You walked away, and I had to fend for myself." "You don't get to come back and pretend like nothing happened." Tom's face fell, and he took a step closer, his hand reaching out as if he wanted to touch her. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." I thought
I thought I was doing what was best.
But I was wrong. I was selfish. Sarah stepped back, the pain of the past threatening to overwhelm her. You don't get to apologize now, she said, her voice shaking. You had your chance, Tom, and you blew it. Tom's expression hardened, but there was a sadness in his eyes that softened the edge of his words.
I know, but I can't just forget about you, Sarah.
I can't pretend I don't care. The tension in the air was thick, and Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent so many years trying to forget about Tom, trying to move on, but here he was, dredging up everything she had buried deep inside. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, all of it came rushing back to the surface. I don't need your pity, Sarah said, her voice rising. I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I've moved on. I'm building a new life here, and I won't let you ruin it. Tom looked at her, his face filled with a mix of regret and desperation. I'm not here to ruin anything, he said softly. I'm here to try to make things right, to fix what I can. Sarah shook her head, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her.
You can't fix what's been broken, Tom.
You can't change what happened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt suffocating, but it was Sarah who finally broke it. I'm not the same person I was when I knew you, she said quietly, her voice filled with finality. I've learned that I can't depend on anyone but myself, and that's the way it has to be.
Tom seemed to understand. His shoulders slumped, and he nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the truth in her words. I never should have left you, he muttered. I see that now.
Yeah, you should have, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's too late. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Tom standing there, his gaze following her retreating figure. As Sarah entered the house, she felt a strange sense of relief. The past had come back to haunt her, but she had faced it. She had confronted the man who had once held so much power over her, and she had found her voice. She wasn't the scared, broken woman she had once been. She was stronger now, stronger than she had ever been before. John was sitting by the fire when Sarah entered. He looked up, his brow furrowed with concern. Everything all right? He asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. Sarah nodded, though her heart was still racing. Yeah, she said softly. I had to face some things. John didn't press her for more details. He could see the pain in her eyes, but he knew that sometimes facing the past was something that had to be done on your own. He stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, he said, his voice warm and reassuring. But I'm here if you need me. Sarah smiled faintly, feeling a sense of comfort in John's presence. Thank you, she said quietly. I think I needed to hear that. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just closed a chapter of her life that she had been running from for too long. Tom's visit had been unexpected, but it had reminded her of how far she had come. She wasn't the same person she had been when she had left her old life behind. She had grown stronger, and she had found a place where she belonged. As Sarah lay in bed that night, she thought about everything she had faced. The pain, the betrayal, and the fear. All of it was behind her now. She had made it through, and now she had the chance to build something new. Something real. The ranch, with its quiet hills and open fields, was her new beginning. And no one, not even her past, could take that away from her. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of change. Sarah had faced the man who had once been a part of her life, and in doing so, she had finally confronted the ghosts of her past. Tom's visit had stirred up emotion she had long tried to bury, but in the end, she had not let it break her. She had stood firm, stronger than she had ever been, and sent him away. The ranch had become her sanctuary, and no one was going to take that away from her. Sarah spent her days working alongside John, learning more about the land, the animals, and the work that came with running a ranch. Every task she took on, whether it was mending fences, feeding the animals, or planting crops, filled her with a sense of purpose. The work was hard, but it was honest, and for the first time in a long time, She felt like she was contributing to something important. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building a life. John, too, had become more than just a figure of quiet support. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. It wasn't just the work they shared or the meals they ate together. It was the understanding, the quiet moments they spent together, that made all the difference. John never pushed Sarah to talk about her past, but there were times when they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, and Sarah would find herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself telling him about her childhood, her family, and the things that had hurt her along the way. John listened, always patient, never judgmental. He didn't try to fix her, but simply let her speak, and that, more than anything, helped her heal. One evening, after finishing a long day of work, Sarah found herself walking along the edge of the ranch, her boots crunching on the dirt path. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the fields, and the cool breeze of the evening made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the land around her, the wide open space, the endless sky, and the rolling hills that stretched out before her. This was her home now, a place where she could breathe, where she could truly be herself. As Sarah stood there, lost in the moment, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see John walking toward her, his steady gait familiar and reassuring. He smiled when he saw her, and for a moment they just stood there, side by side, watching the sunset together. The quiet shared between them was comfortable, easy. "You know, I never thought I'd be able to live like this," Sarah said, her voice soft but full of meaning. "I never thought I'd have a place where I truly felt like I belonged." John didn't answer immediately, but the look in his eyes told her that he understood. He had seen the changes in her, the way she had transformed from the woman who had been lost and broken when he first found her, to the woman standing before him now, strong and capable. He had watched her grow, and in his own quiet way he had been proud of her. "You've come a long way," John said finally, his voice low and steady. "But you've always had that strength inside you. You just needed a place to bring it out." Sarah looked at him, surprised by his words. "I didn't know I had it in me," she admitted. "For so long, I thought I was just lost. But now, I feel like I've found something I can hold on to." John nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've found more than just a place. You've found a purpose. And you've made this place your own." For a moment, Sarah just stood there, letting his words sink in. It was true. She had found a purpose here. The ranch had become more than just a refuge. It had become a symbol of her new life, of the future she was building. And with John's quiet support, she had come to understand that she was not just surviving anymore. She was living. The weeks passed, and as spring turned into summer, Sarah's life continued to evolve. She began to take on more responsibilities around the ranch, managing the animals and the crops with growing confidence. She worked alongside John, but also began to take on projects on her own. There were small repairs that needed to be done, and Sarah was determined to do them herself. The feeling of accomplishment when she finished a task, no matter how small, was something she had never experienced before. It was empowering to know that she was capable, that she could handle the challenges life threw at her. One day, John came to her with a new idea. "What do you think about selling some of the produce we've been growing?" he asked. "We've got enough now, and it might help bring in a little extra income. You could sell it at the market in town." The idea surprised Sarah at first. Selling at the market? It felt like a big step. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the right thing to do. It would be a chance for her to connect with others, to become part of the community in a way she hadn't done before. "I think that's a good idea," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "I've never sold anything before, but I'm willing to try." And so, they packed up a cart with vegetables and fruit from the ranch and made their way into town. The journey was short, but it felt like a big leap. Sarah was nervous but also excited. The town was small, and the people there were friendly, but she still felt like an outsider. However, as they set up their stall at the market, something unexpected happened. People began to stop by, drawn in by the fresh produce. Sarah found herself talking to the locals, explaining how the vegetables were grown, and sharing the story of the ranch. It wasn't long before she realized that she was no longer an outsider. She was part of something bigger, a community that welcomed her. The market became a regular part of Sarah's routine. She learned how to bargain, how to handle the crowds, and how to feel confident in what she was doing. And each time she made a sale, she felt a sense of pride. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. As the months passed, Sarah's life on the ranch continued to evolve. The healing she had found in the quiet of the land had spread through every aspect of her life. She had built something meaningful here, not just in the work she did, but in the person she had become. She had faced her past, she had confronted the pain and the betrayal, and she had emerged stronger. She had found peace in a place she had once thought was just an escape. The ranch had become her home, and it was a place she had created for herself, a place where she could finally be who she was meant to be. As the seasons changed and the years passed, Sarah continued to work the land, but now she did it with the knowledge that she had built a future for herself. A future where she was not defined by her past, but by the strength she had found within herself. And as she stood at the edge of the ranch watching the sunset once more, she knew that the journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever came next. "Thank you," she whispered softly, to the land, to John, and to herself. "For everything."